Good morning, everyone. We all face battles in life, some visible, some unseen. But the fiercest battles often aren't fought against the outside world, they're waged within us. The enemy inside us is subtle yet relentless, feeding us whispers of you're not good enough or you're going to fail. It's that inner critic that stands in the way of our success, connection, and growth. Today I want to talk about how we can defeat that enemy not with brute force but with courage, vulnerability, and self-compassion. The enemy inside you is a persistent and often invisible force that works against your aspirations, goals, and sense of self-worth. It can manifest as self-doubt, fear of failure, perfectionism, or a relentless inner critic that tells you you're not good enough or capable enough. This internal struggle is something everyone experiences, yet it often goes unspoken because it thrives in the silence of our minds. To begin the process of defeating this enemy, the first step is to understand and recognize it for what it is. This requires a deliberate effort to bring awareness to the negative patterns of thought and emotion that undermine your confidence and keep you stuck. The enemy inside you isn't born out of nowhere. It is often a product of past experiences, societal expectations, or deeply ingrained beliefs about yourself and the world. Perhaps you grew up in an environment where mistakes were criticized, leading you to equate failure with personal inadequacy. Or maybe societal pressures to be perfect in your career, relationships, or appearance have fueled your fear of not measuring up. These experiences and narratives shape the voice of the inner enemy, giving it the ammunition it needs to attack your sense of self. Understanding this enemy means examining when and how it tends to show up. Does it whisper in your ear before you start a new project, telling you it's not worth trying because you'll fail anyway? Does it criticize your appearance when you're standing in front of a mirror? Or perhaps it sabotages you with procrastination, convincing you that you're not ready or capable enough to take the next step. Identifying these triggers is crucial because it helps you recognize the patterns that keep you stuck. When you can anticipate the arrival of the inner enemy, you are better equipped to confront it. Another important aspect of understanding the enemy inside is recognizing that its voice is not your own. It often masquerades as your own thoughts, but in reality it is a collection of fears, insecurities, and learned behaviors that do not define who you truly are. Separating yourself from this voice allows you to see it for what it is, a narrative that can be rewritten. Naming this enemy can be a powerful tool, whether you call it the critic, the doubter, or any other name. Giving it a label creates distance between you and it, making it easier to challenge and disarm. It's also important to understand that the inner enemy isn't entirely malicious. In some cases, it's trying to protect you, albeit in a misguided way. For example, fear of failure might be its way of keeping you safe from rejection or embarrassment. Perfectionism might stem from a desire to avoid criticism. By understanding the intentions behind this inner voice, you can begin to address its concerns in healthier and more productive ways. Understanding the enemy inside you is about bringing it into the light. It thrives on secrecy and avoidance, but when you acknowledge it, study it, and name it, you take away its power. Only by understanding its origins, triggers, and intentions can you begin the journey of transforming your relationship with it. Recognizing that this enemy is not the truth of who you are opens the door to self-awareness, growth, and the courage to move forward despite its presence. Facing the enemy inside you requires an act of vulnerability, a word that can often feel uncomfortable or even threatening. Many of us have been taught to see vulnerability as a weakness, something to be hidden or avoided. We associate it with uncertainty, risk, and exposure. But in truth, vulnerability is one of the most powerful tools we have to confront the inner enemy. It is through vulnerability that we can face our fears, address our doubts, and begin the process of growth and transformation. When we think about vulnerability in the context of defeating the inner enemy, it starts with acknowledging the things we'd rather avoid. The enemy inside thrives on our silence, on the unspoken fears and insecurities we try to bury. For example, when we experience self-doubt, the instinct is often to push through it without addressing it, hoping it will go away on its own. However, unacknowledged self-doubt doesn't disappear, it festers. It grows in the shadows, influencing our decisions and holding us back in ways we don't even realize. Vulnerability invites us to shine a light on these shadows and say, I see you. It's about being honest with ourselves and admitting, yes, I'm afraid of failing. Or yes, I feel inadequate sometimes. This kind of honesty is hard because it requires us to confront the parts of ourselves that feel messy or imperfect. But in doing so, we take away some of the power the inner enemy holds over us. Vulnerability doesn't mean wallowing in self-pity or over-identifying with our struggles, rather. It's about owning our stories. When we own the reality of our fears and imperfections, we begin to rewrite the narrative. Instead of being a victim of the inner enemy, we become an active participant in overcoming it. Vulnerability also allows us to connect with others in meaningful ways, which is a key part of building resilience against the inner enemy. When we share our struggles, we realize we're not alone. This realization can be transformative. The inner enemy often tells us that we're the only ones who feel this way, that everyone else has it all figured out while we're stuck in self-doubt or fear. But when we open up and hear others share their own experiences, we see the common humanity in our struggles. This shared vulnerability creates a sense of belonging and reminds us that we're not broken or defective, we're simply human. Leaning into vulnerability also means accepting that failure and imperfection are inevitable parts of life. The inner enemy feeds on perfectionism, whispering that anything less than flawless is unacceptable. But vulnerability allows us to say, I am enough as I am, even when we stumble. It invites us to view mistakes not as evidence of our inadequacy, but as opportunities to learn and grow. This shift in perspective is liberating because it frees us from the impossible standards that the inner enemy often sets for us. Vulnerability is an act of courage. It's the willingness to face the discomfort of being seen, both by ourselves and others, as we truly are, flaws, fears, and all. It's through this courage that we begin to disarm the inner enemy, reclaim our sense of worth, and step into the fullness of who we are meant to be. Vulnerability is not the enemy, it is the path to defeating the one inside. Defeating the enemy inside you is not about silencing it completely or pretending it doesn't exist. It's about changing the way you respond to it. At the heart of this transformation lies two powerful tools: courage and self-compassion. These aren't abstract concepts, they are practical, actionable ways to dismantle the grip of self-doubt, fear, and perfectionism. By cultivating courage and practicing self-compassion, you can rewrite the script the inner enemy uses to hold you back. Courage is the willingness to act despite fear. The inner enemy thrives on fear, using it to keep you stuck in a cycle of hesitation and avoidance. When you feel that voice of doubt saying you're not good enough or you'll never succeed, courage steps in to say, I'll try anyway. Courage isn't about being fearless, it's about choosing to move forward, even when fear is present. It's recognizing that fear is part of the process, but not the final authority over your decisions or self-worth. Courage often begins with small, incremental steps. You don't have to conquer the entire mountain in one leap. For example, if your inner enemy tells you that you'll embarrass yourself if you speak up in a meeting, courage might look like sharing one thought or asking one question. Each act of courage, no matter how small, builds momentum. Over time, these moments of bravery accumulate, strengthening your confidence and weakening the hold of the inner enemy. But courage alone isn't enough. Without self-compassion, the journey to defeat the inner enemy can feel like a constant battle, leaving you exhausted and frustrated. Self-compassion is the practice of treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a close friend. When the inner enemy speaks harshly criticizing your mistakes or pointing out your flaws, self-compassion responds with gentleness. It says it's okay to be imperfect, or you're doing the best you can, and that's enough. Self-compassion is especially important when you stumble or face setbacks, as the inner enemy tends to be loudest during these moments. For instance, if you fail at something important, the inner critic might seize the opportunity to say, see, you're not cut out for this. Self-compassion counters with a reminder that failure is part of being human. It invites you to reflect on what you can learn from the experience instead of using it as proof of your inadequacy. One of the most effective ways to practice self-compassion is to reframe the inner dialogue. When you catch yourself thinking negative or critical thoughts, pause and ask, would I say this to someone I care about? If the answer is no, then it's time to change the narrative. Speak to yourself with kindness, understanding, and encouragement. This doesn't mean ignoring areas where you want to grow. It means approaching them with a mindset of support rather than judgment. Combining courage with self-compassion creates a powerful synergy. Courage pushes you to face your fears and take action, while self-compassion ensures that you do so in a way that nurtures your well-being. Together, they help you navigate challenges without being overwhelmed by the inner enemy's voice. Over time, this approach fosters resilience, a belief in your ability to handle difficulties and bounce back stronger. In this process, it's important to remember that defeating the enemy inside you isn't about perfection. The inner enemy might still show up from time to time, but your relationship with it changes. Instead of seeing it as a force to be feared, you can view it as an opportunity to practice courage and self-compassion once again. With these tools, you reclaim your power and take steps toward becoming the person you're meant to be, unburdened by the weight of self-doubt.